set agenda?
It's actually just to discuss the age, the new age of the juveniles. Mr. Everson, will you shoot Commissioner Burrell over a quick agenda?
Will do.
Let's see, I may have one already. Let me check back and see.
And just to let everybody know, this meeting is live streaming now.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. I have
Commissioner
one.
Burrell, are you okay saying an invocation today?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right. I'll go ahead and lead with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm sure by the time we're done with this, Commissioner Taliaferro will be on the line. Mr. Everson, roll call vote, please.
Mrs. Gage Watts, Mr. Taliaferro, Mr. Burrell,
Yeah.
Mr. Young,
Here.
and Mr. Chavez.
Here, sir.
All right, we have 3 present. That constitutes a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Everson. Today's the juvenile justice meeting. It started at 1:38. It is June the 18th, 2020. Roll call vote has been done. We will have our invocation by Commissioner Burrell, and I'll lead the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Burrell.
Bow your head, please. Lord, we want to take this opportunity to thank you for all that you do for us, all the things that you've done for us. We know that we're not deserving, Lord, but we are here just the same in your mercy. Thank you for allowing us to participate in our meeting today and to try to do the work of the people of Caddo, especially our juveniles, for they are our future. Thank you, Lord, for everything that you do, all the guidance and wisdom that you give us. All these blessings in Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Commissioner. If everybody can please stand, and we will cite the Pledge of Allegiance. Place your right hand over your heart. Military veterans can render a hand to brow salute. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America,
and to the republic
which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner. I don't see Mr. Taliaferro on the line, but we'll roll on. Mr. Everson, go ahead.
Okay, we have no agenda additions, which is the next item. We also, so that moves us on to public comments. We also have not received any public comments for today's meeting, and that brings us to new business. I'll draw your attention to the first item is just that the certificate of teleconference is attached, and that brings us to the discussion topics.
Okay. We have discussion topics are discuss the raise the age mandate, discuss the federal mandate, and discuss the juvenile community summit. Lastly, discuss the alternatives, the expansion of the Juvenile Justice Center. Clay, thanks for being on here. Judge, thank you for being on here as well. I wanted to check, was this agenda called for by Commissioner Watts or Mr. Walker or Judge? Did you guys want to address this?
I think Commissioner Gage Watts. Commissioner.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Gage Watts is the one actually who called and asked me to be in attendance today.
Okay, perfect. I do know one issue that the judge and I and Mr. Walker have talked about. Now that the commission is responsible for the 17-year-olds, we have to figure out room availability or how we're going to intercept the additional juveniles coming from CCC. So I know one thing I talked to Dr. Wilson about, it was looking at that current basketball that was outside and looking at what would it cost to add the additional pod in that location so we don't have to have a separate set of additional services to include cooks, cleaning, security, everything else to raise the budget. That was something I think Dr. Wilson's pulling with Kevin to look at. That's something I'd like to see, but
That's correct.
I know we're on the outside looking in, and Clay Walker and Judge Reed Casey Jones, you guys are there every day. Whomever wants to go first, can you kind of fill us in on the climate and what you feel is needed more so so the other commissioners, especially the new ones that are on board, can hear it coming from what you think?
I'll ask that Clay provides information to you all. I've asked him to get some numbers together, some updated numbers. Of course, we've had some decreases in the population and attention this year, but I'll let him give that information to you, and I'll give my perspective from the bench once he finishes.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Walker, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Can you all hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the bottom line is we, of course, on July 1st, will get all 17-year-olds. Up to now, we have had the non-violent 17-year-olds. Beginning on July 1st, all 17-year-olds, including violent, will be coming to juvenile detention. Our concern all along has been we have a capacity of 24. And the issue is that normally in April and May, and again in September and October, we normally hit capacity. That's a time when I think primarily having to do with the school system, we hit capacity. Now, this year, of course, in April and May, the numbers have been completely off because of COVID. The stretch between March, April, and May, we are down 50% this year to last year because of the coronavirus. So we're not really able to gauge the impact of the nonviolent 17-year-olds on our detention numbers because COVID has really taken out so many of the kids coming in. But starting on July 1st, when we get the 17-year-olds, I imagine what you as commissioners are going to see is actually very little in July. July is normally one of our lower months. It will again be relatively low in August. It will be September. And of course, this year, depending on what the school session looks like, in September and again in October, I do think we'll have capacity problems. And that, of course, those will be emergency calls to the judges to say we're at 25. And so we have to release someone. We have a lot of options on that. We can release kids with ankle monitors, with intense probation officers to watch them, intensive probation officers to watch them. But that's when things will begin to happen. Is going to be September, October, when the numbers get high. I don't know if anybody has any specific questions about the data. We normally, and I've sent this information out before, we normally are getting roughly 400 children a year that are coming into detention. These violent 17-year-olds, as they begin to come to us, should add, if the numbers stay the same over the last 5 years, it should be roughly an additional 60 children coming into detention. And so if those 60 are spaced out over 365 days, we may be fine. If they all come in 2 months, we'd have a problem. But that's what we're looking at in terms of data.
Clay, I have a on that. Commissioner Burrell, you'd like to speak?
I do.
Go ahead. I'll yield. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, I guess my first question would be this 60, this additional 60, that is a prior coronavirus number, I assume.
Yes, sir. That's roughly looking at Shreveport Police data and Caddo Sheriff data over the last 5 years, the number of 17-year-olds they get, and that is obviously pre-COVID.
That's an annual number.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I guess my question then would be, if we were going to increase the capacity of our juvenile system to add these 60 and use that as a worst case scenario based upon the only history that you have, then my question would be, would we have the necessary security for these violent offenders? Because what I'm understanding that our facility is suited for nonviolent offenders, but we have not addressed violent offenders. And if so, then are we looking at beefing up security at our juvenile facility to deal with these youngsters as violent youngsters, or are they one and the same, or we can put them in a non-violent facility, I guess, for a better word.
No, I would say that our facility is designed for violent offenders. We all along have had, for example, 15 and 16-year-olds in on armed robbery, rape, murder. They've always been there. The difference is that, and this is, just estimations, but with 17-year-olds coming in, you're talking about a child that's going to be 30 pounds heavier and a few inches taller. We're talking about bigger kids. Dr. Wilson and Miss Bryant, over the years, we've of course been preparing this for years. We did add some staff, I believe, last year to accommodate. So what we have in the design, and I know, Mr. Burrell, you've been there, we have a pod, which is 8 cells. And normally that would have one adult, one staff member working that pod. Well, last year with the 17-year-olds coming in, we added another adult in that pod. So we are staffed to have 2 adults per pod to take care of 8 children. And like I say, that has always had violent offenders. They're just this year going to be a year older. We are trained in de-escalation techniques and have been using those now since July of 2013. So we are prepared. I mean, I can tell you the staff is, has some anxiety about this just because you're talking about bigger kids. But this is kind of this is more of an anecdotal piece of information. The 17-year-olds are not the ones that cause us as much trouble. At 17, they're more mature and they're really, frankly, interested in getting out. The ones that really cause trouble are 13-year-olds. The more impulsive middle schoolers are the ones that try to really cause trouble. So that's where we are. We're ready for the violent offenders. The issue is going to be, and I'm just kind of catching everybody up to speed. We had talked about this at a prior meeting. In addition to the 17-year-olds, based on new federal legislation, we are getting the juveniles that are transferred to adult court. So by Louisiana law, if you commit murder at 15, 16, or now 17, you can be transferred to adult court. And so you would be tried by a district judge down on Texas Street and looking at adult prison as a penalty. Historically, those children, the transfer kids, when they are transferred, they physically go to CCC and they're tried downtown. After this new federal law, they will still be tried downtown, but they'll be spending the night in juvenile detention. So that's the real issues. We have the 17-year-olds coming, about 60 of those that we anticipate, but it's the transfer kids that are really going to take up the beds. There are, the last time I spoke with a lieutenant at CCC, I believe it was late last week, possibly early this week, but they had 11 under 18-year-olds at CCC at the time. And so that's the issue is starting now, children charged as adults will stay in juvenile detention until they are convicted in adult court. And that's the real trouble in terms of the number of beds we have.
So the issue, let me be clear and recount. Your issues with the 17-year-olds is not discipline because they seem to be more mature. It is the capacity of your unit to house them. You may have to have increased capacity, is what I'm understanding. Your security is not a problem, in which you said that given the fact that they are older, they may be heavier, but they don't provide any more of a discipline problem. So to narrow it down to one or two things that you see as an issue for you for 17-year-olds versus what we're doing already, kind of give me that maybe in one or two points.
If
your,
I'm
your
understanding
critical issue.
yeah, the critical issue is simply bed space. So the 16-year-old that's charged with murder as an adult normally will be here for about 2 weeks until the appropriate court hearings are held and they're transferred to adult court, and they normally would go to CCC. Now they may stay in juvenile detention, and the trouble with that is that detention, by its nature, it is it's a facility meant to hold short-term cases pending trial. So a child gets arrested for stealing a car, and they'll come to detention and be here for 30 days. If they're sentenced, say, to 1 year in state prison, they go to Monroe under a state facility. So we are a short-term facility. The trouble is the children charged with murder as adults, if they're 16 and charged with murder, and it's 1.5 years before their trial, they'll be here for 1.5 years. Our average length of stay is 10 days. So that's the real issue is that the 11 children that are now at CCC would normally be at CCC for months and months, and now they're going to be in juvenile detention for months and months. Whereas normally we are turning over kids in coming in and out of cells on a regular basis, short-term stays.
Okay, so if you could work out a plan to transfer kids in and out, it may not have such an impact on your capacity. But if not, they wind up being here on a longer term stay as a worst case scenario, then you are anticipating additional construction.
That is the proposal that I think we've all been discussing, Dr. Wilson, and I know Judge Casey Jones is on here. We've talked about, trying to minimize that. You don't want to have too many cells. We don't want to have to pay for that. But how many is enough for public safety is the discussion. And so somewhere between 1 and 2 pods, I know, has been the discussion.
Yes, I can address that issue and kind of give everybody an update on where we are with respect to that. About 3 years ago, hi, Commissioner Gage Watts. I'm just going to recap the issue on the facility requirements when we talked about it 3 years ago in terms of construction. When we first got the Raise the Age initiative, was an unfunded mandate to begin with. In the early 1990s, the Caddo Parish Commission built a new facility. We used to be on Kings Highway at one time, and we kind of tripled the space in the facility, went up to what we currently have in the 1990s. And when we built it, there was never any additional money appropriated to operate it. We built a bigger facility, add more staff, more capacity, but the same 1957 millage was never adjusted. So we find ourselves today with a deficit of $4 million every year to operate the current detention center. When we looked at this 3 years ago, we had an architect give us some proposals and cost estimates on what it would take to build 2 additional pods. And that was $13 to $14 million of construction to build it at the existing site. And we thought we would make use of the kitchen and only have one medical provider and try to make some use of some synergy by building it at the current location instead of duplicating all the services twice over. So what we did want to do was to build another facility with no increased operating money, because the current millage, as the 1957 millage today, is far less than we collected in 1957. Because we never roll back, we never roll forward any of the tax assessments. So we actually collect less amount of money, and we're operating on a millage that was created back in 1957, with a $4 million deficit every year, and then to operate the additional capacity is another $3 million. So we'll find ourselves with a deficit of $7 million every year, as opposed to the $4 million we currently have. And where will that money come from? So what we did, we started some other discussions about alternative. Back in the 90s, the legislature had given us some authorization to come up with a regional detention center for the region. But at the time, we didn't have the, I guess, the wherewithal to do this. But since that time, we have been speaking with my counterpart, Mr. Bill Altimus, on several occasions about let's look at going forward with the regional center. And he said he has 20 acres of land off of Highway 80 in Bossier. He has some money and he's capital money to build a new facility. And they were looking at this already. So why not look at everyone's needs? Because Bossier Parish does not have a detention center right now. We need more space. Red River, Lincoln Parish, they all need more space because they don't have detention centers. And we thought, let's build a big enough center to rent bed space of those who need it and bring the operating costs down for everybody who involved in the process.
What is the opposition to your idea?
There's no opposition right now. Back in early years ago, there was some opposition, and perhaps they may have a little undercurrent today because, let me be frank with you, some folks don't like the idea that it's going to be in Bossier versus Caddo Parish. But a regional center have to be located someplace, either Bossier Parish or Caddo Parish. And since we haven't designated land in a building capital project yet to build a new facility here, we thought we would take advantage of the work and discussion that already been taking place with respect to Bossier needing a place. And they were open to the idea of building a place big enough for all of us. So we did have several meetings. We brought in the architect to relook at the plans that Bossier had already drawn up to perhaps consider everybody's need and beyond what they needed to make it a revenue generator so that we can add that additional expense, because we know we're not going to get any more tax money other than what we collect now to do a detention center if we had in Caddo or Bossier Parish. So we were looking at this idea. We invited, I think, someone from OJJ to come in to meet with us. And we were waiting. There's a person who's considered an expert at designing these facilities. We were waiting for him to come in and kind of give us a hand with this analysis. So we've been talking about it, had 3 or 4 meetings, and we will continue to have meetings. And then when we have something substantive, we would like to present it to this committee and get their buy-in before we go forward. But the legislation is already there. It establishes its own board. It has authority to call for taxes. And we can totally be out of that business if we had the political resolve to go forward in that endeavor and do it. So,
well, could I ask you the question?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
President, first of all, what is the opposition other than possibly Bossier managing it and operating it? That we can't set up a regional, something that would be independent where we can all be involved in it, or does it have to be controlled by Bossier?
Hey, Mr. Burrell, Bossier really don't want to control it. They asked us if we would control it because
Okay.
we have the knowledge and the expertise to do so. But if we go forward with the legislation as it exists today, creates a full autonomous board, and they will be fully empowered to totally run it and staff it and so on and so forth. So, but what we haven't done yet is put the measure before this committee or any other committee to vote on the idea of whether or not this is something we actually want to do. Right now, what we're trying to do is get all the groundwork, and so when we do bring it to you all, we'll be able to answer all your questions.
Hey, Dr. Wilson,
Sure.
thank you for that description. Madam Chairwoman Stormy Watts, welcome to the meeting. I'm gonna hand the meeting over to
Sorry,
you.
I was late.
No,
When the boss calls and say, get to the meeting, you get to the meeting and you make everything else work.
I get it. We all have lives outside of here. The next person to speak after Commissioner Burrell is Commissioner Young, and then I'd like to be on the board as well. I was just going to follow up Dr. Wilson's comments to Commissioner Burrell, because I know Dr. Wilson doesn't want to say it, and Commissioner Burrell, you're new on, this is something that I've seen, but there's a sense of if you build it, they'll fill it. And I've heard that time and time again, where a lot of people are worried that if we build a bigger detention center, that we will find occupants. However, I understand the concern with that, but we're at the point now where we can't think about that because it's really past the point where we have the availability to think and create other programs because we have what's coming down the pipe. And I'll yield my questions until after Commissioner Young. And here, take it from here, Commissioner Watts. Thank you, guys.
We don't have anyone else in the queue.
Just Young and then myself.
All right,
And
thank you.
I see judges on there as well.
All right, I'll check the participants. Thank you, Mr. President.
Can I ask a question now?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Wilson, I wanted to ask you a question really quick about the idea that you just described. You said there would be a board that could raise taxes in charge of the regional center.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that they would have an easier time raising taxes for this than we do?
There's no, sir. There's no guarantee to that, but at least it would be a less political process to go through.
Okay, and the board, would the board replace the Caddo Parish Commission as overseeing the juvenile probation and justice programs?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so then we would just be out of the juvenile supervision business.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And then Clay, I wanted to ask you, you said the transfer kids would be the issue, the ones that end up staying there a long time for adult trials. Is that the 60 a year? Or is that a different number on top of that 60?
No, sir. The 60 is simply the 17-year-olds that are charged with violent crimes. That's the average of 17-year-olds charged with violent crimes. In terms of transfer kids, we transfer somewhere around 4 children a year. So the issue is it may only be 4 in 2021, but if they all stay a year and a half, it'll be 6 going into 2022. It can be up to 8, and that's when we anticipate we would see a problem over that kind of long term.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
You're welcome, Commissioner John Paul Young. I think we have President Mario Chavez.
Thank you, Commissioner Watts. I had a question for Dr. Wilson. The regional cost or the cost for that regional center up front and then the carrying cost. Do you have those figures or is that something that you guys are still working on?
We're still working on that, Commissioner. So here's what we thought that we would operate it based on what we currently have right now. And we will look at maybe perhaps another way to repurpose the existing space. If we thought this was a great idea and went in with it, we would repurpose existing space and use the money we currently have towards operating the regional center, being that there'll be Bossier Parish, maybe perhaps DeSoto Parish, Lincoln Parish, Red River Parish. They would also need to have bed space, and that would be on a fee schedule to help reduce the cost of operating the entire facility.
I like the way you're thinking. That brings me to question number 2. Are we being Caddo Parish, are we paid or subsidized for the transfer juveniles that we're currently taking or that we're about to intake?
No, sir. We pay any costs associated with that, as well as what we pay for the Caddo Correction Center. Every time an inmate is brought from CCC down to the courthouse, we pay for that as well.
Okay, so we're on the hook for those right now.
Yes, sir. And if you build a regional center, if we were thinking about building some capacity in the facility so that court could be held there as opposed to transporting all the kids from someplace. I mean, the kids will already be there. And perhaps we can work out something that the judges will be able to go there and use part of that facility to conduct court there. Either we would have to transfer them to the current courthouse we have now, back to the detention center.
What is the current situation in say Red River Parish where they do not have a detention center? Where do those kids go? Because obviously there's some kids that make mistakes. What happens there?
Clay, do you know the answer to that question?
I do, yes, sir. That particular parish rents from the Ware facility in Coshada. Right now, Bossier Parish, Red River, several parishes around Coshada rent beds from that facility at Ware.
So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build a regional center, and to acquire more, for lack of a better term, customers. We're going to have to go out there and solicit those parishes to move their detainees over to our regional center, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Are we going to, go ahead. You got a question for?
Clay,
Go ahead, Clay.
is a Ware Center a high security center that meets the requirements for 17-year-olds?
It does. The Ware Center is a juvenile detention center.
Okay.
We're going to have to look regionally at the other centers that are currently housing the kids that we're going to anticipate as occupants that we can raise revenue from, to see, will our costs be greater than their current scenario? Because then I don't think we'll achieve them as occupants. And we could be building a facility anticipating on getting these detainees, and that never comes to fruition. And we're on the hook for a higher operating cost than we were before.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at that. At what cost is Red River housing their juveniles at the Ware Center, and at what cost? Of course, we won't know that till we know the build out cost and the monthly operating cost of ours. Will we be cheaper? Can we provide the Red River Parish and surrounding parishes a cheaper solution? We also have to look at that as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Chavez, this one point I want to bring out to your attention. Bossier Parish is already paying over $1 million plus every year to Ware, and they're the ones proposing to build a new center.
So we're 3 million short now. We're getting there.
Right.
All right. So I just want to remind everyone, we don't have but about 10 minutes left here, maybe 20 minutes total before our next meeting starts. So I see we have the Honorable Judge Reed Casey Jones on there, and I think it's imperative that we hear from her about the discussion that we're having about building this juvenile detention center regionally. So President Chavez, was that it for your comments?
That's it. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
I did have one, but I'll
I think you're on
to
the
the
board.
judge.
Okay, thank you so much. And if everyone would please mute your phones until you're speaking. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Burrell, for yielding to me. I do have a question before I make my statement. Dr. Wilson, do you have a date when you all go back to the table to discuss this regional facility? What's the next? Is there a next meeting date scheduled already, or has that not been discussed yet?
We've discussed it, but we haven't came up with a date yet. We need to, because the COVID kind of slowed us down a little bit, because we were having face-to-face conferences, meetings. So we need to re-engage in that discussion and move things along. But I think I will be coming to you all and asking you all the serious questions of whether or not you all think it's a great idea or not, because we don't want to expend a lot of time on this if the commission does not have the resolve to go forward with the idea. And not that we want to build more bed spaces, but we need to build an effective, efficient operation than what we currently have, because we are out of space bed-wise.
Correct. Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you, to make sure that the judges were involved in, if not with the powers that be for the regional facility, at least meeting with you and Ms. Bryant prior to. I think some of the concerns are that how many beds can Caddo get? That's a question. If you're dealing with other parishes, we're having to share bed space. We don't want it to be to the point where we're thinking that we have, for instance, 30 beds or 40 beds, and then Bossier comes in and says, well, we needed like 10 extra beds, so we took 10 of y'all's beds. So we want to make sure that we're clear on how this will be set up. That's the thing, if we're going to be sharing space like that.
Right, I understand.
Okay, so that's really major.
Yeah, Judge Jones, clearly Bossier has not been in the business of running a detention center because they don't have one. That's why they were relying on us to provide the leadership and the know-how to actually run this one. And of course, that will have to be worked out. If there's a fully autonomous board, who would those people be employed by? So we would have to bring a consultant in, and then have a lot of discussion with all the stakeholders on what's the best way to proceed. So we would consider everybody who wants and needs, and giving good analysis on how we'll pay for it and what's the benefits of it.
Okay. That's just something that we just definitely have to take into consideration with the bed space. And basically, President Chavez, you said something earlier about, you weren't saying this, but you did mention it, build it and they will come. I think that we have the judges at the juvenile court who are well advised as far as the needs of our youth. And so we try to limit incarceration as much as possible. Even if it's just, a weekend stay or something, we really try to limit that. And so I don't even think we're at that point anymore, building, they will come. We have to have the space that we need. We're working on, decades ago of a detention center that should have, been updated well before now. So I just appreciate everybody for your input. I appreciate you all for calling this meeting today. I just want to make sure that it's still on the minds of everyone, because this is something that's definitely needed. I know we've been slowed down a little bit with COVID, but it's time for us to start picking things back up and dealing with the issues of no space at JDC. So, and in the event that this regional facility does not come into fruition or it's delayed even further, we have to come back to the table to decide what do we do in the interim. Because these numbers would possibly go up in September, and when we gain some type of normalcy back to our lives, we have to think about where are we going to put the kids that are offending? What are we going to do? We've been very fortunate for the last few weeks that the numbers have been extremely low. But you have judges who will get on the phone and make personal phone calls to facilities and ask people to, pick up children that are maybe in OJJ's custody, or, could a youth shelter possibly take a child for us to kind of give us some more space. So that's something that we don't want to continue to keep doing, but we have to come up with something in the interim.
Right. Okay.
Commissioner Watson.
I'm here. Thank you so much, Judge Casey Jones, for those comments. We definitely don't want to do anything without hearing from the judges and where you're standing on this regional facility. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's a very important point for us also to take into consideration. I think we had Commissioner Roy Burrell next.
Yeah, I'm going to try to sum it up in a couple of questions, especially on the regional concept. I think the regional concept is good. My only reservation would be, and it probably wouldn't be just from us, if other facilities, if other parishes are going to use it, is transportation. Because anytime, a lot of times these parents have to have public transportation, try to get there to see their kids. But being right there in Bossier, hopefully that will not be a problem, first of all. Secondly, when I heard them talk about the regional facility for cost savings, but at the same time, we're saying that we're renovating, we may be renovating our facility, even with the regional facility. Are we saying then that the regional facility then will house the 17-year-old and we would not necessarily have to increase our capacity where we are? Because from what I'm hearing, we're going to keep our facility.
No, sir. We're going to repurpose it, Commissioner Burrell.
Okay.
Because we have to utilize the amount of money we got coming in, and it is not going to be enough to sustain 2 locations. So
Okay.
we have to go all in on design to be able to house kids of various ages, and then have them separated, like a different section for 17-year-olds versus the main population of kids younger than that. And also your first question, we did look at the location. It is along the bus line. The transportation system supports that location. The public transportation system.
Okay, so if we use the regional concept, then we're not going to have to go in and spend money for renovating our facility because it'll be okay.
We would repurpose it, but not re-renovate it.
Okay, well, yeah, I know what repurposing is, but not renovation. Okay.
That's
All
correct.
right, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Can I
Chair.
ask a quick follow-up for Dr. Wilson
Thank
about
you.
purposing?
Yes,
I
sir.
have you on the board next, Commissioner John Paul Young.
Oh, thank you so much. Dr. Wilson,
Yes, sir.
I had a couple questions about the center. So you said we would repurpose it. What kind of purpose do you think we might be able to use with it? And what kind of budget would we be able to spend on that if we devoted all of our juvenile budget to a regional center?
Well, we had not figured out all the details on what the repurposing will look like. But what we did want to do is have 2 locations, 2 detention centers, a regional one.
You don't want to.
Right. I mean,
Right.
we don't have the
Right.
resources to cover both. So whether the
Right.
repurpose, whether it becomes an administrative, whether it becomes something else, that is to be determined. But it would not be a priority within the capital budget to spend money on it, because
Right.
you would already have the need met with a more enhanced facility that would have capacity for all ages, but have them segregated by age categories.
Right. I'm a little bit skeptical about our ability to find a purpose for the courts in the detention center other than court and detention center. I mean, it's not impossible, but I imagine it would require us to spend some money changing it around too.
Right.
And then, so I had another question, which is, I know that like the studies aren't in and stuff, but if you had to guess, which timeline do you think would meet our housing needs for the juveniles faster? The Mario's idea of converting the basketball courts into a building with pods, or a regional center that's sort of intergovernmental?
I think either way, it's going to be about 18 months construction time. And also, if we only add one pod where the basketball court's at, you know, the issue with that is you're still going to have a pretty expensive cost, but the operating costs proportionally to that will be greater too. And you already have a deficit of $4 million. So it's going to be another, at the very least, $1.5 million to $2 million on top of that. So that's what the issue is. Currently, we move monies around based on the 2007 millage that was passed. We rededicated part of the public works millage to give money to the criminal justice fund to take care of the deficit in the juvenile detention fund. So that need would be greater, and then you had to take more from that up from the public works fund. And we say we would not compromise the delivery of service if they allow us to make the current transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, I see we have President Chavez, you back on the board, or is that?
Yes. No, I'm back on. Thank you, Commissioner Watts. Dr. Wilson,
Yes,
I heard you say that Bossier has, they spend $1 million a year currently on their juvenile. Where are their juveniles being detained?
I think it's Ware.
But they're at Ware too?
That's
that
correct.
correct?
They also rent from Ware.
Well, shoot, maybe we need to go to or Ware and see what they're doing over there. Let me ask you this. What political bodies need to agree to this regional center for us to get started building it?
We have Bossier Parish and Caddo Parish. The enabling legislation already exists. We just have to implement it.
So what's the protocol on pulling the trigger?
Okay, well, what I think we'll have to do is get our legal team to review that and give you an updated presentation on that. Will probably be the best course of action.
Can we set a deadline on that? Because Mr. Walker said we're okay for July. August is questionable, but come September, we're in a dangerous scenario. So we don't have a lot of time. We got basically the summer before we start addressing this.
Yeah, I think we can immediately go forward with that. I mean, if you all want, you know, the legal team can give you what the legislation say, because it spells out how the borders to be put together.
Okay.
It's all spelled out. So we can bring you all up to speed. If you like what you hear, and then I'll contact Mr. Altimus and see if they can get an answer from their board. And if they want to go forward, they said they have the land and they have money. And we can go ahead and start nailing this down if that's the direction we want to go in.
Can we have something to the Juvenile Justice Committee within the next 2 weeks so that our chairwoman can call a meeting after she reviews it?
Yes, sir. We can. We had that information, right, Clay?
Thanks, Dr. Wilson. I'm going to wrap this up. Commissioner Watts, I just wanted to thank, before I get off this, Mr. Walker and Judge Reed Casey Jones. I know I was answering to Mr. Burrell's, if we build it, they'll fill it. That was the scenario that was obviously thought of years back. It's not like that. I have a lot of faith in Mr. Walker and Judge Jones. They truly care about the children of Caddo Parish, and I've seen it firsthand. They go above and beyond, even to meet with kids that haven't even got into the juvenile justice center, just to sit down and try to guide them on a correct path. You guys are doing a great job, and I'm thankful that you work for Caddo Parish. So my hat's off to you guys.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Judge, yes, sir.
Just a point of clarification on that. I guess being in the state legislature and seeing private prisons and how they have incentivized the criminal justice system, I'm glad we're doing it from government standpoint and not private, because there is an incentive there on the private side to increase capacity and of prisoners, regardless of whether they're kids or not, in the private system. And I still hold that belief.
Okay, well, this is what I'm going to ask. I know that, let me make sure there's no one else on the board. I don't see anyone else on the board. I thank you all. I thank you, first of all, let me say to you, President Chavez, for making sure that the meeting was continued to be carried out. And again, I apologize for being late for the meeting, and I'm glad that the discussion was already started and that we did have a quorum. At this time, we didn't have any motions that were made. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I know that you mentioned to Dr. Wilson about 2 weeks, but I was thinking, since we are pressed for time, if we could call another meeting next week.
Yeah, we'll be ready.
Okay. And let us have that meeting. I'll get with Jeff Friday and see what day would work best for everyone next week. And we can reconvene by Zoom so that we can continue to keep this ball rolling in the right direction.
I love it.
Judge Ree Casey Jones, thank you for everything that you're doing for the Juvenile Detention Center, as well as the courts. And Director Clay Walker, we could not do it without you and your staff. We appreciate everything that you're doing over there. It's always a blessing to have someone who cares about our children, and their goal is not to lock them up and throw them away, but for them to improve their lives so that they can be the quality citizens of Caddo Parish. So I appreciate you all.
Thank you. And thank you all for what you all do as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, and I see no one else is on the board.
I want Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Woody to call me after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, I will, sir.
Thank you.
President Chavez said that was a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Yes.
Second by the chair.